Greetings. This is the first of a series of lessons highlighting the process known as socialization. Focus on Chapter 3 in your textbook, and there's information about socialization beginning on the 7th page of your 3rd study guide. At the top of that 7th page, there's more or less a working definition of socialization. So I hope you won't confuse it, as this young man has, with some sort of a physical disorder or disease. But again, what exactly is socialization? Well, you might look at it in this way. We're talking about a process through which and by which you and I are transformed from a biological organism into a social person. This is also the process through which we acquire our culture. So literally, it's a process by which we become social and cultural human beings. Again, we're transformed from a biological organism into a social person. Well, what does that mean? Well, we have a sense of who we are. We have a sense of self-identity, but we also develop through this process a notion of social self, how we are different from others, who we are in relationship to other people. And through these agencies of socialization, we acquire our culture. And it's important that you remember I repeat, two things about socialization. Qualities, characteristics, if you wish. On the one hand, as highlighted here, we're talking about something that's lifelong. This thing doesn't magically end when you and I exit adolescence, when you and I become 21, okay, or 65, as the case might be. It's lifelong, okay? It begins at birth. Some might argue that could it begin before birth? Well, maybe. Some of you might have heard of parents who read to the fetus, play music to the fetus. So you can make an argument that it could even start before people are born. And again, it'll continue to the point where someone dies. And the event of a person's death is going to socialize that person's loved ones, the survivors, if you will. Plus, this is a two-way process. Don't assume that it's just a trickle down from adults to children. Think about how you, as children, when you were a child, how did you socialize your parents? For example, did some of you participate in sports at a very young age, and maybe your parents weren't big into sports until you picked it up, and then, man, they start learning all they possibly can. Did you ever socialize your parents with respect to the latest trends in fashion, music, movies? I suspect that you have. So it is very much a two-way process. Likewise, you want to bear in mind that we don't want to discount in any form or fashion inheritance. Of course, you get into this big argument about what's most important in the lives of a person, nature or nurture. Okay? On the other hand, keep in mind that sociologists and other social scientists, to a great degree, are going to emphasize this point. You and I are, again, an interesting combination of biological characteristics. On the one hand, some of our behavior is powerfully affected by our genetic structure, qualities that we've inherited. On the other hand, a lot of our behavior is a result of learning and experience, coming from outside factors. So the nature argument is innate behavior. The nurture argument is, again, the impact of our interaction with others. This being a sociology course, we're going to probably focus more on nurture than nature, but again, don't de-emphasize the nature elements that are involved in the process. A good example of that is found in Chapter 3 in your textbook, where you're introduced to the interesting case of Jack and Oscar, two identical twins that were separated shortly after birth, reared in different environments. On the one hand, they had certain physical abilities and certain talents such as math that seems to be more the result of, again, heredity. On the other hand, when you look at and examine their attitudes, their values, the mates that they chose, and even their drinking habits as such, that seems to be much more influenced by their social environment. So we are this, again, being that's a complex interplay between natural factors and environmental factors. To really highlight the importance and the significance of socialization, I want to take a moment to briefly discuss one of my favorite movies, the original version, 1931 version of Frankenstein, with Boris Karloff as the monster. There's a really fascinating sequence, and keep in mind this is a neat film in a lot of ways because it raises a lot of questions about the nature of science and its overall role in the world. But there's a really fascinating scene in the movie or sequence where the monster escapes, wanders out into the countryside, and he happens onto this young girl who is seated by a lake, and she's throwing petals from flowers into the water. Well, he joins her, and together they pull up flowers and throw petals into the water. Now, if you follow through with the scene, they run out of flowers. So what does the monster do? Well, he does this. He picks up the young girl and throws her into the water. As a result, she drowns. Again, he stares at her for a while, picks up the body, and carries it back to her home, to the horror of her family. Okay? Now, what's interesting about this is that it highlights the fact in a very graphic kind of way that here is someone who is devoid of any real knowledge about the way things are. That's in part the, again, significance and importance of this process that we call socialization. In the next lessons, we'll go into much more detail about the process. Until then.